Welcome to this series on operating the DECam Community Pipeline. This episode is about triggering data sets into the pipeline. In a previous episode, we discussed starting the pipeline. The pipeline is up and running, as seen in the pipeline monitor. We could also run TL status as shown in that other episode. So as data is taken at the telescope, it is transported to Tucson and placed in the archive, the Astro Archive. So the first step is to identify what data set needs to be processed. What is usually done is to look at what data sets have been processed and which have not been processed. The command AR status provides that. By default, it gives the past 20 days or the past 2 weeks. In this case, it's showing that all data has been processed. At the telescope, it's been cloudy the last several days, so there's no new data to process. A variant of AR status, an alias, AR stat, is more commonly used, which would show everything that's not yet been processed. Now let's pretend that we want to reprocess an earlier data set. From March 16th of 2021. This shows that everything was processed, but we want to reprocess this data. AR stat showing that this is proposal ID 2021A 0365. That is important to allow us to just process that particular data set. There are many ways to trigger the pipeline. The basic method is with the command plpsq. It has a number of options. I'm going to use an option that you would not normally use, which says do not trigger the pipeline. We are going to use different methods to start processing, and we only wanted to start one set processing. It's very common now to specify the proposal that you want to process rather than the entire night, which is what you would get if you didn't use the -P flag. You don't need to put the whole proposal ID, just enough that matches that night. So we'll just say we want to process proposal 365. Processing data sets are defined by a queue. In this case, we'll use TOO. Everything has to be capitalized for a target of opportunity, which this was 21A. So this is the queue name. It'll be coming back later. And we can tack on a identifier, let's say MB for Melissa Bruckner. Then the set of nights that the data is to be processed from, 2021 03 16. So this will locate all data with the 365 proposal ID from this night and create a data set. As I said, we don't trigger But what was created was this file, which is the data for a trigger. You can see the detailed documentation on the operator's guide for information about this. It contains a list of all of the archive file names that are to be processed. And they are the full path to the archive mass store. So this is the basic command that can be used, but more often the operator wants to schedule things in advance so that it's very easy to keep processing, go on to the next data set. This is done by having a pipeline queue file. And this is a file that exists in the operator directory. Wait a minute. And has a name that's the queue name with next.dat tacked on. This is what a queue file looks like. It can have comments. It can have commands to be executed. The commands are usually the basic PL/PSQ commands. And here we see that the only thing that's not commented is what we did before, which will be then the next thing that gets executed when this queue file is used. A shortcut for examining different queue files, PLQ 21A, which just edits the file. The most common queue file that you will use would be one that's based on the semester. A shortcut is PLQ with nothing. Will open up the queue file for the current semester. As you see, there's a lot of things here, including the next data sets to be processed. In this case, it's night by night for this proposal 356288. We can check what needs to be processed next with check next. So there's one data set to process from the night of March 16th. To use the queue file, the usual command is top next, top being the top level of the pipeline, which is what gets triggered when you want to process a new data set. By itself, it'll trigger the next data set in the current semester, but it can also contain the queue that you want to process. The behavior of top next is that it is also called by the pipeline when it finishes a data set. And so that allows it to link on to the next thing in the queue. For now, we're only doing one. There is a short delay to avoid clobbering the queue. So now in the pipeline monitor, we see the data set that was created by PL/PSQ that has the queue name, it has the date, and it has this processing ID, which is a compact representation of the time this data set started. It is now in the top pipeline in a step called top stage, which means it's going to the archive mass store and copying and staging the files that were in the list. Since I don't want to actually process this in this episode, I'm going to kill this process using an alias PSQ, which matches greps what you're looking for. Stage. Now I'm going to just kill the two processes. What you'll find in the pipeline monitor is that the blackboard flag is turned into F, which is stands for failed. And that's okay. We did that on purpose. So another way that often happens for the operator is to want to process a particular list of exposures that has been requested. You're going to the data directory for the top pipeline. And there I've created a list, mb.list. And it's the list of all the raw files. They have to be the raw files. What I'm demonstrating here is that what the trigger needs is the full path name to the archive mass store. The way to generate that from a list is the command archive path, whose argument is either a list of base names or more commonly a list, which we use the @ symbol. If you're an IRAF user, you'll recognize that. In this case, it will show that it could be pipe directed into a file, but a shortcut would be -O, which says replace the input list with the fully qualified list. So now, to trigger something from a list rather than using the PLPSQ, which finds data in the archive by night and proposal, we'll just execute this list. Notice that the list could be any set of files. They don't have to be from the same proposal ID. They don't have to be from the same night. They don't even have to be close in time. So this can be a very useful command for special requests. So now we're going to use this list with PLPSQ as before, only now we say -D and the name of the file. Then the rest of the arguments are the same. You don't have to use the date, it could be something else. But we want the data set name to be similar. And now we have another data set running, just using those files. I'm going to clear what's running with the command PL restart, which restarting a sub-pipeline clears the blackboard. The other commands for triggering files that may occur are used with cron tab, as it says in the more detailed documentation. So thank you for watching. Good luck.